The All Things TechIE Podcast is a product of the Extreme Media Network. For advertising and sponsorship opportunities, please visit www.extrememedia.ie. That's XTREME media.ie.
Audio visual from an Irish perspective. This is the All Things TechIE Podcast.
As I said, churning out the episodes. Some of these programs were recorded back to back, but it's just endorsing this episode 42 of the All Things TechIE Podcast. And as I stick up some jokes on the screen here about parents who have sent me and teachers who have sent me these little jokes and tweets and Twitter messages of working from home and also trying to educate your children, whether they are in primary school, secondary school, or for me, having two lovely little monsters under the age of 4 who run around the house like mad, and I only get to do my work late at night because all the creches and ECCEs are closed, the schools are closed, and this is just the way things are. Also, the government are talking about the fact that we should be allowed to work from home in the future, and it should be a legal requirement if we ask our employers to do so. Wait to see where that goes. Interesting. But in the meantime, we are teaching our children from home and educating them from home. So I thought it'd be a great idea to try and do a series of the different platforms that are being used to educate our children from home. And where better to start off with Jason Mobley, who is actually a director of Zoom for Education. I caught up with Jason for half an hour and had this conversation, a brilliant conversation of what Zoom does for education and what is going to be unveiled with the Zoom platform. Jason, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. I know you're a busy guy, probably, especially with the COVID-19 lockdowns and helping people with Zoom for Education. I'm going to jump straight into it because I know we only have about half an hour. I think you have meetings afterwards as well. So just give me a little background on yourself and how you ended up in that position for working with Zoom for Education.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the last 10 years of my life, I was the executive director of IT for Florida A&M University. So we did distance learning for quite some time. We used video very heavily, and fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic hit. We were all sent home, and luckily we actually purchased a site license of Zoom in January. So, I jumped into kind of a mode of training faculty on how to use Zoom best practices, and kind of the rest was history. We actually did very well during the pandemic. And then in May, I had 2 people reach out to me over LinkedIn with Zoom asking me if I was interested in a job. Honestly, at the time, I wasn't planning on changing a job because I'm actively getting my doctorate in instructional technology. But I said, let me see what they have to offer. And I came aboard in Zoom in July. And it's been an amazing experience, amazing company to work for. The culture here is truly intoxicating because everyone truly cares about their fellow coworker. So I would say I get up every morning and I just love to go to work. And even though I'm working from home and this is kind of what I'm going to do moving forward, I just love the experience.
That is, I did say even before I press record that is the coolest office I've ever seen in my life. I see you have some D10 Me's behind you. You have the big, is that a bigger D10 behind you as well?
So I have a lot of equipment. Some's on camera, some's off, but I have a D10 Me. This is the Aver EP65. So it's a touch-enabled Zoom room. I've got a neat bar over here. And then on my main setup, I actually have multiple cameras. So I have a Huddle Cam HD Pro. I've got a GoPro Hero 8. I've got an Aver tracking camera. And then what I did is I have a D10 D7. I put that at my son's martial arts studio. So they're using that during the pandemic. And then at my wife's dance studio, I have the D10 on. as well. So I basically took all my different Zoom rooms and have them kind of divvied out, and having people use them to kind of service different needs at the time.
Now, I have to just ask you, and while I ask questions, I must point out that I do have my Zoomtopia mug in my office here as well. But what did your wife say to you when you said, "Hi, wife, I'm working from home and I'm taking over like pretty much a room in the house"? Like at the moment, I'm not. For all the listeners, I've been saying this. I'm not actually in a skyscraper overlooking Dublin City. That's my green screen that I can use with Zoom, but for you, you look like you've taken over nearly a room the size of a living room in your house to just do your work.
Well, when I came home, my wife also works from home as well. She works for a software developer, but she was in this office, and I actually was in our formal dining room. So I had a laptop set up um, with an extra monitor. And I realized that because of all the equipment needs in my lab, I needed access to the communications room, which is actually the closet behind my green screen. So what we did is we flip-flopped offices. So she took over the formal dining room, I took over the office, and everything's kind of added to itself, because initially I didn't even have a desk, right? I always worked from the laptop at the kitchen table, but I added a desk, I added a stand-up desk, I added monitors, I added lighting. It's kind of been a project that's been growing, and I have one more upgrade. I'm going to upgrade at the end of the month. I'm actually adding a DSLR camera as my main Zoom camera, and I've done a lot of research. I actually interviewed a famous YouTuber on a podcast that I had a couple weeks ago, where he's using a Canon EOS R with a really nice lens, and I'll tell you, I've never seen another person be as clear on a Zoom call. So that's I don't want to call it my final upgrade, but that's my next upgrade.
Well, I tell you, your picture quality at the moment, Jason, is superb. But I have seen a couple of podcasters that have used DLSR cameras, and just the depth of field on some of those cameras is unbelievable. Now, you mentioned that you're doing a PhD. I have to ask you what the actual name or the thesis title that you're using for your PhD.
Well, interesting enough, I actually am comparing two teaching modalities, face-to-face versus synchronous video. So now that I no longer work for Florida A&M, they're actually the school that I'm going to target in my research study. So they teach in Tallahassee face-to-face. During a course with the pandemic, they started remote, and now they're moving into a kind of a high flex type environment. So what we're doing now is Crestview and Tampa, Davie, and Jacksonville, which are all remote campuses, they're taught over Zoom rooms. So what we found is preliminary exam scores, the students that were taught over video are scoring higher than the students taught face-to-face. Wow. But the interesting thing is, amazing, they're being taught at the exact same time, right? So there's no differences in teaching strategy. So, the hypothesis is, does teaching over video provide for better student outcomes based on engagement, right? And so it's going to be a mixed method study where I actually look at the exam scores, but also interview the students and talk to them about their experiences, because I've heard teachers say, well, I can't be as effective when I'm teaching over video as I'm teaching face-to-face. And I actually would disagree with that. I think you can be more effective. It all has to do with how you engage in students and how you design that engagement. So that's going to be the basis of my study. And I'll be finished at the end of this year, and I'll be Dr. Mobley, and I'll be happy to, they say the only thesis is a done thesis. So hopefully that'll be done soon enough.
Well, you know what, like we have the only other PhD AV technician that we can talk about is Joe Way, really, Dr. Yep. Joe Way. And he doesn't even use the word doctor in front of his title most of the time. He's just, but like primary schools and secondary schools in Ireland closed down, and people are still struggling here in Ireland at teachers. My sister is a principal of a primary school, and she's still struggling, and they've gone down the route of Google Classroom. but our government hasn't really given them any guidelines to say, right, you use A, B, or C. Is that different, Jason, over in the States? Now, when the pandemic hit, is government telling you that we recommend that people use Zoom, or we recommend people use Google Classroom or one of your competitors?
Well, I don't think our government is actually kind of prescribing or recommending what platforms to use. I think it's left individually to the schools. And I kind of think that's twofold because in higher ed, a lot of them have had distance learning programs. So they might have had a solution, and that solution might have worked or it wasn't scalable, right? Or looking at comparing your primary and secondary education to our K through 12 education, which is very similar, is that a lot of them had no technology, so they were left scrambling. So you had some people move to Zoom, you had people use Google, you had people use Cisco, and you had people use Microsoft. And what I think you quickly found is Zoom actually scaled with that large increase, and some of the other providers didn't have the ability to kind of keep up with the quality and all the feature sets that were needed. So the one thing that I would say I'm proud about working for Zoom is that we're very agile and we release features very quickly. And a lot of our platform is based on customer feedback. It's not, we don't look at it as what do we don't look at it as we know what everyone needs. We talk to customers and say, what do you need from a feature perspective? What would enhance the classroom? And then we take that back with our product teams and we actually build the features based on their feedback.
And I couldn't agree more. I think you're the most adaptable solution for when people want something changing. Like, I think I go back to the ISE days. The last time I was at ISE, I wasn't at this year's ISE or the year before because my wife was pregnant at the time. But when I went to the last IC 2 years ago, everyone's going, "Oh, it's work. Look at our educational products. It works with Skype for Business." And I'm like, "No, don't mention the word Skype to me. I don't care. I'll say it in the podcast. I don't like Skype for Business." And then it was Skype for Business became Microsoft Teams, and Teams is now seen as maybe we can work this into education. Whereas Zoom always was the platform that it just worked. You go up to a screen and it worked. It was user friendly, and I think was the idea of Zoom for education as big pre-COVID-19, or was it very much we might think about this in the future, or did it just grow out of COVID-19?
Well, I would say that Zoom was originally built for enterprise, right? We were built for
Absolutely.
businesses. And I think the pandemic actually kind of brought this to light that Zoom is a platform that can easily be adapted to education. Yes, we've had to make some changes on our ends, but we've had, like I said before, a lot of higher education customers were using Zoom for meetings and conference room spaces, but not necessarily for remote teaching. I think the pandemic accelerated the need for moving into an immediate remote learning environment. And we've been steadily helping higher education and K through 12 customers setting Zoom up, getting trained, teaching them best practices from the platform. We've also been launching educational-based features. And now we're at a point that we're really thinking about the future of education. Like, what do we do post-pandemic? And I think it's different for higher education and K-12 and finding solutions to keep that collaboration going.
Yeah, like I'll give some examples, and this is just people around me in Ireland. Even my sister being a principal, I said, why don't you use Zoom? And she's like, no, I can't do live. I'm too scared to do live. It's like, you teach to these kids every day. Why are you scared of doing it in front of a camera? Is my thoughts, and it's getting that fear of that away. But it's also the fear of the parents. Now, not it wasn't my sister's school, but I'm hearing other examples of neighbors on the street that said, "Oh yeah, well, my school, this was totally unsustainable. They wanted me as a parent to sit with my child while they attend a Zoom call for 30 minutes." I'm sure you hear of all these stories, Jason, in your role where teachers don't know how to react to the COVID-19 pandemic. They want to use video collaboration software, but they don't know about the securities and they don't know about child protection and so forth. I guess you answer these questions on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the fear that you're bringing up is kind of twofold because number one, live classes, as we know, creates engagement, right? Being able to see the nonverbals, watch the eyeballs, making sure that the students understand the material that's being taught. So I'll kind of back up a moment. When I did my master's degree, there was a section of it that was asynchronous. So I like to call that busy work, right? They give you material to work on. Maybe it's a pre-recorded lecture. What I lost in that is I couldn't ask questions. So if I didn't understand something, unless I emailed my teacher or my professor, I was stuck. And then also there was a section that was synchronous where every week we would have a video and we would ask questions and we would interact. That was my favorite part to that. So let's talk a little bit about security for a moment. And I'm sure that the term Zoom bombing would come into that conversation, right? So Zoom technically has already or always had security built into the platform, but those controls like meeting passwords and waiting rooms were up to the customer to enable. We didn't turn them on by default. You could choose to do that. And the best analogy that I would give is you build a house, the contractor hands you the keys. It's your job to lock your doors, to arm your alarm, things of that nature. But due to bad actors, Zoom has, we've had to rethink our security strategy. So during the pandemic, we spent 90 days doing a full security review, and we actually stopped. We put a moratorium on creating new features. We were very transparent during this process, and we started pushing security settings to our customers. So we automatically enabled randomized meeting IDs, meeting passwords, waiting rooms. We even installed a security icon in every meeting that would lock down screen sharing controls, and it would create a new way for a host to report a participant that shouldn't be in the meeting. We even established a trust and safety department that investigates any of these security concerns. We even created a security advisory board, and we hired some new top-level security leaders in the industry, like Jason Lee is our new information security officer.
Jason Lee,
we also implemented end-to-end encryption, right? So we have customers that want to take advantage of that feature. And then lastly, I would say that we then enhanced our encryption standard and changed it to AES 256 GCM encryption. So I'm proud to say now at this point, Zoom is probably one of the most secure UCaaS platforms on the market today. So to the teachers out there and the principals that are listening, we need to kind of dispel this fear that the platform is unsafe. We take the platform very secure, the student privacy, and all the laws that affect that. We're even putting some new features out in the next month or two that actually enhance that even more. So I would say that we need to think what type of education is needed for our students. We understand that we can't control the pandemic. We can't control how long that we're on these lockdowns, but what we can control is the type of engagement that's happening through our teaching.
And you hit the nail on the head there, Jason, with engagement. Now, you see all the time, my sisters send them to me. I have AV friends that send them to me. You can't fix stupid. Even as an AV technician, I will say you can't fix stupid. You get the videos of whether it be a teacher, whether it be in a meeting for business, and people just walk into shot, into camera, and they could be half naked, or they decide that they're not paying attention and they bring their mobile phone into the toilet with them and don't remember that everyone can see you on the call. With that in mind, now I do a lot of Zoom calls, both for business and predominantly webinars for my higher ed. Do you think that with K to 12 or primary school, what we would call in Ireland, are they using more webinar, or are you encouraging them to use webinar more, or are you asking them to use Zoom meetings? What would you recommend?
So typically when I answer that question, I would say that if it's a class that I'm teaching where I want participation, collaboration, and engagement, it's always going to be a meeting, right? So again, because I want the students, and I go back to when I said earlier that I when I teach, I look at eyeballs. So if I notice that I have a student not paying attention or they're not understanding, I'm going to draw them back in, but I need to be able to see them to do that. Now, if I'm providing a training or a public facing event, then I'm going to do a webinar. So that's kind of the delimitation to me, is that if it's public facing, typically always webinar. We'll use the Q&A function of the webinar, and then we have our set panelists, so it's more of a broadcast style. But again, when I teach, I like to teach in a meeting because I like to use polls. I like to use breakout rooms. I like to ask questions and kind of flip the classroom in such a way where I'm not constantly dissertating to the students. We're having discussions and conversations so they understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Now, some of the things I attended Zoomtopia. It was great that the fact that living in Ireland and the fact that I wouldn't always have a budget to travel around the world even before COVID. I love the fact that Zoomtopia was virtual and anyone could attend this year. And hearing some of the new features that's coming on down the chain. And again, things that people have asked for. Like, I nearly jumped off my seat and jumping up and down when I heard that eventually there's going to be breakout rooms brought into Zoom webinar. Is there any timescale for this?
Yeah, so breakout rooms for the webinar actually will happen this year. It's actually being developed right now. And I would say that we're kind of looking for Q2 to Q3 of this year for breakout rooms and webinar, but that's definitely happening.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, and with the different age groups that we're talking about, K to 12, primary school or secondary school, or even university higher ed, do you see there's different requests being made by end users for more user-friendly approach and the ways of teaching young kids compared to young adults in university? Has there been, like, I know one of the features we talked about in Zoomtopia is being able to do the grid in a more classroom type of look, where the kids might be sitting in front of a virtual desk. When's that coming along the line? Like, I know there's one for classrooms type of virtual, and also one that looks like a courtroom type of virtual. When are these going to be available?
So what you're mentioning is immersive scenes, right? We announced that at Zoomtopia. So that's the ability to create customizable meeting scenes for whether it's an immersive classroom experience, if you're in a boardroom or something of that nature, but it creates that engaging visual experience. So we're targeted to go live with immersive scenes for the beginning of Q2.
Okay, that's cool. I noticed it just popped up on my Twitter feed because following so many different AV tweets and whatnot, that someone has made a third-party app for iPad and iPhone where you can use your iPad or iPhone to be a document camera and be able for, and really useful during the pandemic for teachers to be able to open a book and just use their camera on it. But I thought this is already available. You can do virtual cameras if you know the Zoom software properly. There is the option to do a virtual camera, so you could technically use your.
In the example that you gave, and I actually had someone demonstrate that for me the other day. So they took a phone and wirelessly connected it as a virtual camera, right? With the nice part about it is and I'm not sure that they were using AirPlay, but what ended up happening is the green light went off in my head to say, what other uses could you use for something like this? So in the example, they were actually kind of given a tour of their office, right? And actually showing me and pointing at things. But if you put it into the classroom, you could use it for virtual field trips or things of that nature as well. So I'd like to see more use of that, whether it's from the phone perspective or even like what I like to call like a backpack kit, where an educator could take it and put it on in a mobile fashion, connect it to a Zoom call, and be able to take someone and from an educational perspective, give them a demonstration almost in a third person field of view, to demonstrate something. So almost like a field trip.
Yeah, and talking about the field trip idea again at Zoomtopia, the new concept of on Zoom, where it's events that's going to be broadcast through the power of Zoom. Now, straight away, I jumped on to onzoom.com or on.zoom.us, whatever the website is, and I seen there was one on the Yosemite National Park, and having been in Yosemite National Park nearly 12 to 15 years ago, I immediately wanted to join it, but then just realized it's US only that was able to join these meetings. When is On Zoom going to be global?
So currently we introduced our public beta for On Zoom. So again, if your listeners are not familiar with the platform, it's an online events platform and marketplace for paid Zoom users who want to create, host, and monetize, whether it's classes, continuing education, or even fundraisers using the meetings platform. So kind of the way it specifically helps is you can schedule and host one-time events. You can do an event series. You can even do drop-ins for up to 1,000 attendees. Of course, that's depending on your Zoom meeting license. But the big piece here is that you can list and sell tickets. You can share and promote public events via email and social media. And then you can actually reach new audiences beyond that geographic location, almost to your point, Justin. So it's in beta currently. It will go live later this year. A lot of people are taking advantage of it, mainly from a way to monetize their event.
Yeah, and again, I think it's how this wasn't thought about before, that if the platform is there, just use it, because it has grown in leaps and bounds. Do you think, Jason, now when the dust settles, whenever that is, but when the dust settles for COVID-19, do you see that more schools will go, okay, we instead of having a touchscreen interface in our schools for classes, even for primary or K through 12, that they'll start being interested in using having a D10 or having an Acer on their classroom wall, not even just in case there's another pandemic in a couple of years' time, but it also gives that flexibility that if, let's say, they wanted to link up with another school and do a type of international educational field trip, that they could do it in that way. Do you think people are going to buy into it when the pandemic's over?
Well, I absolutely do, for a couple reasons. One, I recently interviewed a school out of Canada, and they actually went with the Neat bar and the Neat board solutions in their schools. Now they're considered a primary and secondary school, but their reasons were, yes, we're using Zoom rooms for remote education now, but they actually have the ability for the high school to actually come in and teach a class, or bring in guest lecturers, bring in field trips. And you kind of mentioned that too, like that whole educational continuity planning. So let's say a student might be contagious, but they feel okay. If they're at home, they could still join from home. So there's definitely a lot of different uses to the Zoom rooms post-pandemic, not just remote emergency instruction. And then specifically on the higher ed side, I mentioned the term high flex, but I think you're about to see a major change in the ways that universities do business, because instead of doing that traditional, like you have to come to class, this is the way that we teach, I think that they're going to start meeting students where they are. And if students have found that they learn better from the privacy of their own home, or some students feel like, hey, I need to be face-to-face to learn, then you're going to have this flexible learning environment where you can come into the classroom, you can join from home, or you can kind of do a mixed mode of the two.
It's something that I might even follow up with you after the podcast on emails, but I love to see a statistic of how many in the age ranges for primary school, secondary, and higher ed. What has the uptake been? Like, would you see a large uptake in the younger ages to the older age higher ed, or is higher ed always going to be predominantly the case, and then K to 12?
Well, that statistics that you mentioned, we actually have a department that kind of runs those numbers and does market analysis. So I'll look to pull those numbers, but I agree with you. It would be interesting to kind of see that. I think the immediate prediction is probably that higher ed probably has more of the lion's share of that, mainly because from a funding perspective, because I still think of the K through 12 side, there's kind of two things at play. There's lack of funding, right? And in the US, there's a lot of grants now that the government's providing, like the CARES Act or the CAA grant and all of those. But you still have this digital divide problem where you have students that they don't have laptops, they don't have good internet, and we have to solve that problem. And I think that a lot of organizations, including Zoom, is starting to do that. For example, Zoom has a new foundation called Zoom Cares. And what it is we provide foundational grant funding, technology and technical expertise to solve both educational and social inequities and kind of attacking that digital divide directly.
Now, I know you work very much on teaching people how to use Zoom for education. Has Zoom ever thought about doing, like you mentioned, digital certificates for teachers or for the end users to say, right, you are now a beginner, an advanced, a professional in being able to deliver Zoom to education?
So, Justin, I think that you must have a crystal ball to look inside of my head, because
Yay.
actually that's a project that we're working on as we speak. So we're looking at Zoom credentialing and micro badging to be able to, and we're going to start it with the teaching and learning side, right? But we've even looked more to even like workforce development, where you can become a Zoom certified integrator. You can, and you'll have different badges for different technologies that you get. And of course, those badges, because a lot of this credentialing and badging is very popular nowadays. You actually can put it on your resume and people can look and show that you're certified. The difference in what we're doing, though, is we want to make sure it matters, meaning like you don't have a certification where you memorize some things and you pass the test. We want to make sure that when you get this credential, that you've proven that you know this stuff like the back of your hand. So when you say that you're Zoom certified as a teacher, or you're advanced, or you're an expert, or whatever the terminology that's used, it really has a lot of weight and it means something.
Yeah, and I really want to be, I will be one of your guinea pig beta testers when that comes on, and we can talk about that off mic as well. Absolutely love to be involved in getting something like that. With it, the other thing that got mentioned at Zoomtopia, and I guess will also help Zoom for Education, is Zaps or Zoom apps, and the integration of other third-party apps into a sort of store where you can literally pull these up on Zoom. That's going to come down in the next quarter, I believe.
Yeah. So again, we're officially calling it Zoom apps. Those will launch this year. We're actually kind of ramping that up now. So a lot of people ask the question of how are these different from apps that are already in the Zoom app marketplace? I would say that existing marketplace apps are typically integrations that connect to Zoom from within the app. I would think of those as workflow connectors that enable users to leverage Zoom, kind of like Canvas as an LMS, right? But the new Zoom apps integrations enable Zoom users to seamlessly use apps like Asana within Zoom. So before, during, and even after the meeting. So we have developers that are steadily building applications to use in Zoom. And it's going to be one click to present in a meeting, or you can send a Zoom app to engage participants collaboratively. Current apps that are enhancing right now are Asana, Coursera, Dropbox, Kahoot for gaming purposes or gamification, Miro for the ability to do like Post-it notes and brainstorming, Kaltura, ServiceNow, SurveyMonkey, Zendesk, and and we're planning to launch many more this year, but it's Zoom apps and on Zoom, taking those two together, we're really moving Zoom into more of a platform than just a killer app. So definitely see those two features are going to be highlighted very heavily this year.
Now, is it too early to ask when are you going to start merchandising the t-shirts saying "I survived 2021" on Zoom?
Hey, that's I've seen some memes out there. It sounds like we need to make some shirts out there. The big part here is, in a very sincere perspective, is that teachers did not choose this, right? They were actually kind of thrust into this. They had to figure it out. A lot of them have done a good job, and there's some that struggle. But number one, I appreciate any teacher that's actually went in and said, "Hey, I've got to change the way I've done things. I've got to make it work," because at the end of the day, making sure that our children, our loved ones are being educated properly. And again, we have a responsibility here at Zoom as well to make sure that we're building features to make that experience even better for the future.
Well, even the simple features. I was helping my sister the other day, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to download this app that's going to allow me to screen capture my maths notes." And it's like, why are you downloading something else? Why don't you just do a Zoom call to yourself and record it, and there you have the video? I said, "Oh, I never thought of that." It's these, thinking outside the box. She thought, like, once she was in a call with people. It's like, no, you can be in a call by yourself and you could be recording yourself.
Oh, I do it all the time. I do demo videos. I did one earlier before our call where I was actually creating a demo video of our new live transcription feature that we're launching out here at the end of the month. And it's a beautiful thing because it allows, traditionally you had third-party services like closed captionings that you'd have to do. Now with live transcription, the teacher or the professor turns it on, and then it gives instant subtitles under the meeting. And then students that have accessibility needs, they can actually keep up with that. It even has a searchable field, so you can go back into something that was said earlier in the course and actually search it and find it. So live transcription is yet another thing that we're launching here for education.
Here's one that I got asked the other day, and if you come across this, we can discuss this off mic. Teleprompter. Could you have something that would actually have notes or text being delivered that, like, so a teacher is teaching a class, but actually could be looking to camera and using it as a teleprompter?
So there are solutions now, which and I can send you some offline, but there are solutions now that you can have apps on an iPad, and then a lot of times they'll put that iPad on a stand by the camera, right? Or you can actually go full blown teleprompter, but the iPad version works really well. And I saw a demo of this recently, and what happens is if you're saying words, it will automatically scroll based on what you're saying. If you kind of go off script and say something different, it will pause until you go back and start reading the words again, and then it will scroll as you talk, which is really, really neat.
So voice recognition to the actual text.
Oh yeah, and it works very well. It works very well. And I've considered building a setup with mine as well, because I do a lot of guest speaking and a lot of presentations. So it's something that I'm actually kind of keen on as well.
We will touch base on that off mic as well. I am going to be sending you a lot of emails in the not so distant future. If anyone that's working in education, whether it be higher ed, K through 12, or even primary schools around the world, that want to get in touch with you to ask you some questions on Zoom, where can they reach out, or where's the best place to pinpoint?
I would say the best place to get a hold of me, and I'm very active, is on LinkedIn, right? So I use LinkedIn a lot. What's funny is I never used LinkedIn prior to February of 2020. Wow. What I did is I set up my profile. I said, here's where I work and here's my education, and that was it. And then in February, I had a post, and this is what's so interesting about the whole Zoom story is I did a proof of concept with Zoom Phone, and I took a picture and I posted it, and I said, well, this isn't really meant for Facebook or Instagram. My friends aren't going to care about me doing a test of phones, right? So I put it on LinkedIn and I said, easiest voice over IP deployment ever. And I hashtag Zoom and hashtag Zoom phone. Well, the next day I woke up, the post had 10,000 views.
Oh my
The
God.
next day after that, it was 20,000, and it went viral, right? And what's interesting is from that post, I had people from the UK, Ireland, Germany, Japan, Australia, all these different people started coming to me and saying, what is your opinion of this? And what is your opinion of that? So I got into this mode where I actually did a lot of testing of Zoom rooms and made videos and rated them. So that was kind of the fun thing that I did the pandemic. But long story short, I believe in the pay it forward approach. So if people come out, I mean, people use LinkedIn all the time to solicit business and ask questions like that. And sometimes you have to push those people to the side because it's not relevant. It doesn't align with what you're doing. But there are people every day that ask me, how do I do this? Or how can I do this better about Zoom? Or what do you think about this? Those people I love to engage with. So again, look me up on LinkedIn, Jason Mobley. Just do a search. You'll find me there, and send me a private message. I'll be happy to answer any question that you have.
Jason, thank you so much for giving. I know you're a very good, busy guy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and discussing like that. You can contact Jason on LinkedIn, and we will be in touch off mic with a load of more questions. I'm sure it's only the beginning of a good friendship, Jason.
Yes, sir. Well, you guys take care over there and stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks a million, Jason. Appreciate it. That's all from episode 42 of the All Things TechIE Podcast. My thanks to Jason for joining me and giving me half an hour of his time. Really great guy to talk to. Really look forward to seeing what Zoom brings out in the next couple of months and Q2 of 2021. Don't forget, I am a finalist in the AV Nation AV Professional of the Year, the Reader's Choice Awards. The link is on your screen. I would really, really, really appreciate if you go over and vote for me against Chris Nito, and hopefully I will be called AV Professional of the Year for 2020 with AV Nation Reader's Choice Awards. Really appreciate if you can go over, if you haven't voted, to go over and vote for me. On the screen now, you can see different ways of listening to past episodes. Like, subscribe, share, tell your friends. We're on all your favorite podcast stores. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.